What happens to your money when you die?
That depends on how good you've taken care of it.
Well, you usually want to leave it to somebody in your will.
Well, in my case, I'm going to be leaving it to my children.
If you've put some plans in place, though, there's a lot of different things that can happen.
Somebody has to read your will and determine where everything legally goes.
If you don't have any plans in place, then the government gets to decide everything.
50% of Canadians die without wills. The kinder, gentler way to go is to have a will laid out for your survivors, a financial plan laid out. Today we're going to talk to an expert that knows all about those things. Dave, thanks so much for being part of the show today.
You're very welcome. I'm thrilled to be here.
Can you explain for us laymen, what are the basics of financially planning ahead?
Basically, planning ahead takes away all the anxiety that life brings. Planning ahead for one's funeral, planning ahead for retirement, planning for kids' school. We plan ahead for everything, paying our taxes, for example.
So when you deal with a client and they're putting their financial house in order.
Correct.
Does the aspect of their end or their death come into that conversation?
Depends what time of life they're in. It always comes up with the very senior, and I call those folks over 80. And I stress very, very strongly at that point to make sure your affairs are in order. Make sure you have a will. Make sure you've got a medical power of attorney. Make sure you've got the power of attorney. Consider prepaying your funeral arrangements so that at the time that it's needed, that's less stress for those who are taking care of it, your executor.
Right.
Now, at different ages, I have different stresses that I deal with my clients.
Sure.
Folks in their 20s with their first baby are not worried about how they're going to be, how their funeral arrangements are going to be.
That's right. That makes so much sense that we seem to live in these seasons or these chapters in our life where we're having our first babies, first mortgages, or the over 80, as you said, and all those years in between. People are going to recognize this. There's misconceptions or misinformation that we repeat to each other often, whether it's about wills or banking.
A big one is around wills. If I have a will, I'm going to die.
So that's not true?
The truth is we're all going to die. And if you do die, it's best to have a will because you will leave a mess for whoever is there. So if you love your family, show them you love by having your will done, having your funeral paid for, so that when the worst possible thing happens, everything is organized, the executor job is not terribly onerous, and everybody's happy.
To be candid, I worked as an undertaker for probably about 4 or 5 years telling people, you should get a will. And I didn't have a will myself. And I saw time and time again people dying without wills and the mess that it can be. And I quickly went home and said to Leanne, I said, we got to get wills.
Well, an example of a mess is with joint bank accounts. Or with bank accounts. If somebody passes, there's expenses with funerals, with visitations. I mean, you can spend tens of thousands of dollars on that.
Sure.
Typically, I don't see that in my practice, but I think that once it's paid for, there's a sense of ease.
You know what? That's a situation I've seen it happen many times. People that are watching this have heard of that, maybe about the freezing of the accounts. Can you, in layman's terms, what does that mean? Is there actual icicles hanging on the account?
Well, it seems that way because you can't access it.
Okay.
It can't be accessed until the lawyers have gone through a will or gone through the probate. And sometimes that could take a while. And I've seen it take years in some cases where it's contested.
Wow.
Now, by having a will, it doesn't necessarily mean it's not contested, but it's your last words. And your last words are held in very high esteem in the courts.
Right.
And that's what they listen to. And I'm here to really talk to the executors out there. The worst job you never want to have, but it's there and it must be done.
That's right.
And if you're the one that has been selected to do that, then the onus might be on you to talk to whoever you're an executor for to tie up all these little loose ends that might be there before that day comes.
Right.
Because that day could come tomorrow. It could come when you're 90. Who knows?
Sure. Well, the statement I've heard a few times, and it's tragic to hear this, people will say, James, we thought it would be a lot easier if we never ever talked about this. We thought, it would just fall into place, and it's completely misguided.
Well, you think it's easier spiritually, but it's really not, because just by having that conversation with yourself or your spouse, that breeds anxiety.
Sure.
And final closure is final. So having your intent and your wishes on paper should be something that's second nature. We all have opinions about politics, about baseball or hockey teams. We deserve the right to have opinions on where our assets are going to go,
sure,
how they're going to be dispersed, and who's going to get them.
We're obviously encouraging folks to get their financial house in order, get their funeral plans in order. And we're often asked the question, well, shouldn't I put my funeral plans in my will? You get people ever ask you that? Should my funeral directions be in the will?
I've seen most of the wills that I've seen have their funeral plans in there.
Really?
I want to have a visitation. It could be very detailed. And if it's not detailed, then the executor, there's some responsibility on him or her,
sure,
to come up with that solution and looking and trying to find where the budget was to do this.
Right.
And I think that's one of the contentious issues sometimes when somebody dies without a will and they're trying to make funeral arrangements, but if they didn't really know what the person wanted,
you're guessing.
Yeah. And people tend to guess high rather than guess low.
Sure. Well, I've often heard the phrase of when it's the scramble, when there's been no plans,
right,
that's when people either emotionally overspend or sometimes emotionally underspend.
They just shut down and get it done, and they're gone, and they
that's
don't.
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's unfortunate. But having that discussion, particularly with a spouse or surviving adult children,
vital.
It is vital. It's a terrific word because it just makes that passing so much better.
In our company, we have mechanisms for families to pre-fund their funerals, whether it's a simple trust account or maybe an insurance product. In your background as a financial advisor, is there certain products that people can also consider that aren't even connected to a funeral company? Is that true?
Yes, there is. I was saying that most of my clients over 80 years old, I have the very serious conversation, and it's around open accounts. So accounts that are non-registered accounts. They cannot have a beneficiary on them. But there are some accounts of that nature, open accounts, offered through insurance companies called guaranteed investment accounts.
Okay.
Or GIFs, guaranteed investment funds. They allow you to put a beneficiary on your open account, and then when you pass, all it needs is a death certificate.
Right.
You don't need a will or anything else, and it bypasses probate, it bypasses a lawyer.
Sure.
And within 30 days or so, the money is moved to where the beneficiary needed. 15 years ago, when I started creating written plans, I was making people last until 85 years old. Now it's 95.
Sure.
And that's industry regulated, so it's not a myth.
Right.
The truth is, we are living longer.
Yeah.
And don't spend all your money too soon, because you're going to need some at the end.
That's right.
And that's a whole other discussion about care facilities and prior to death.
Sure.
But so all that is very complicated. Taking care of your final arrangements, that's easy. You're planning your own party.
Yeah. That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
Okay, Dave, thanks so much for being part of the show today. You've given us a lot to think about. You bring a lot to the table.
Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed being here, and what terrific questions.